So we talked about last week about the first phase or stage of training, which was the teaching stages. So the three-part series is teaching, reinforcing, refining. So this Sunday we're going to get into the second stage, which is the reinforcement part. And like I said, we can put this in all aspects of our lives, whether it's your spouse, your horse, your dog, your relationship with the Lord, anything you want to. It's just that I feel like that the horse is such a great illustration of our walk with the Lord. I really feel like the Lord put the horse on this earth for us to learn more about Him and ourselves. So last Sunday we talked about the teaching part of it, how you set things up for the horse, and you set things up so that they can start understanding what you're expecting of them. The communication, of course, is mostly body language. Body language is the universal language, right? Anybody can understand it unless they're blind. But horses primarily use body language in how they communicate with each other. So once you start understanding the language, then you can start, explaining what you want or what you expect. The reinforcement part of it, sometimes when you see reinforcement, it's, people are like, oh my gosh, I thought this was natural horsemanship. I just thought we, pet the horse all day, or, what's going on here? And I always tell people, when you take things back to a natural aspect, it's how, if you had a herd of horses in a pasture, and you had a horse that was acting, I believe I always take the little stud colt as an example, because, he's starting to come into himself, and he's filling his oats, and he's starting to push and exercise his dominance that he's going to have one day, but he's starting to test the limits. And usually it's the brood mares. They're like, kiddo, you're still a kid. You need to get away from us, or you need to get out. And so, what do? What typically, if a horse is being rude to another horse, what happens? Yeah. Yep, kick. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, get away. And some of the blows they give each other, you're like, holy smokes, it would kill us or put us in the hospital, wouldn't it? So you have to act like another horse. That's all you're doing. And you got to take your emotion out of it and think about doing it for the horse, not to the horse. So as we get into reinforcement, this is always a kind of a sticky thing for people, because for somebody to get firm with a horse, usually they have to get mean or mad before it happens. Because you're just like, oh, I love my horse. He's so cute. And if I can't get him to do everything with treats, then something's wrong. And that's not the case. And usually it's the, not to pick on the women or the man, but usually it's the women that, are usually more the, come on, get in the trailer. I'll give you this carrot. And then the guys are like, excuse me, honey, I'll get him in for you with their big 2x4. So you got to be in the middle of the road. You got, one of my teachers used to say if you could take 60% of a woman and 40% of a man and put them together, you'd have the perfect horseman, because you've got to be middle of the road. So with that being said, as we move into reinforcement, a lot of what you're doing is I don't even really like to use the word discipline, because it's more you're setting boundaries for the horse. You're teaching it where the boundaries are, because it's not really. If I say discipline, it's more like, okay, yeah, the horse is doing it to you, and the horse is pretty much for the right thing. It's just you're showing the horse the boundaries in the way. The same way with the Lord, He loves us. He shows us boundaries. He shows us things that we should do and shouldn't do to live a happier life while we're here on this earth, isn't it? Because the Bible is just basically a book of examples of what you can't do, because the Lord's already done it for you. But what He does do is He shows you in that book how to live a happier life while we're here by doing what? Honoring Him and following His word. His law is already set into motion. It's already there. The day Adam sinned, the law is already set into motion. And there's things that happen through consequence of your actions. But then it goes back to free will, doesn't it? And the horse has free will just like we do. And they're going to be taken back to nature every chance they lose a leader. And I always we talk a little bit about the right and left brains. I'm not going to get into too deep of this, but in the reactive side of a horse's brain, they live there 72% of the time in the wild. I don't know who came up with 72%, but it's more in the right side of their brain than the left side of their brain, isn't it? So the right brain is the reactive, the scared, the side of their brain. The left side of their brain is when they're playing with a gate latch. And they're like, trying to figure it out. Has anybody ever had a horse open a gate or figure how to untie their lead rope? That's the thinking, the processing side of their brain. They're thinking about it. Okay, so naturally a horse lives in that right side more than the left. So people are just the opposite. They live in the left side of their brains about 70% or more of the time than their reactive side. And I always try to get a good analogy of the right side of your brain. So the right side of our brain is like if you're watching a scary movie and the lights are low and you're eating your popcorn and all of a sudden, Freddy Krueger's about to jump out and somebody comes up behind you and goes, wah! What happens? You're like, huh! Your popcorn goes flying and they scared you. So we're more processing than we are reactive, but we do have reactive sides of our brain. And when people get emotional, they have a tendency to move into the right side of their brain. They're like, man, I was just so mad. I just saw red. I was just so mad. I was out of the right side I was in the left side of my brain. Okay? Or even I have arguments. Sometimes I get into the right side of my brain. It's like, okay, sorry. I try to come back to the left. But does it happen all the time? No. You try to bring it back. So, there's 4 competences. I do these clinics and seminars, and I get to this, after the second day of a beginner clinic, I'll get into the competences. There's 4 competences. One of them is unconscious incompetence. And that's a lot of times we go through life like that. You just don't know what you don't know, and someone tries to say, hey, come here and learn this, and you're like, nah, I'm just happy going on with unconscious incompetence. Then you're just kind of like a bug through life. You bump into something and move over here, and then you bump into something over here. So those of us that are trying to learn, they'll come to my clinics, and they're just like, I really want to get better with my horse, and I really want to learn this, relationship business. So as the clinic progresses, they get into what's called conscious incompetence. We're like, holy smokes, there's a lot to this. I had no idea. And it happened to me, you guys. And I actually trained horses for several years. I was like the colt starter of Tombstone, Arizona. I actually thought I was all that in a bag of chips. And then once I realized, I was always trying to improve myself, so I went and learned some things and saw some things, and I'm like, holy smokes, I really don't know what I don't know. And so then you start learning, you start, watching RFD TV, you start, going to Horseman Church, you start, going to clinics, seminars, you go to people that are competent in the field that they're in, and you go, okay, teach me. And so after the conscious incompetence comes conscious competence. Okay, so you're starting to get pretty handy. I see students of mine doing things with horses that I haven't even done. They're like, wow, they're getting really good with their horses. They're actually learning, and they're getting so good even their horse thinks they're good. And so, I see some things happen, but they're still having to think the process. Okay, there's 4 phases of firmness, ask, tell, promise. Okay, I got that. I got to make sure my body's up when I send and down when I want them in, and they're still going through this process. But then the 4th one is the best one of all. And anybody think of what that one is? Unconscious competence. Exactly. So then you start going, it's just like coming second nature to you. You're starting to use the positive side of your brain, right brain, okay? And the horse actually has a positive side of its right brain too, but we're not going to get into that. That's next week. Lane and I are already talking about, okay, hold it back, pull the reins in. So once you start understanding what you're doing, it becomes conscious competence. And then you're starting to do things just naturally because you've taken the process to that point. So it's the same thing that the Lord does with us. You don't, for some new Christians, I don't have this awesome, testimony or anything because I grew up with the Lord. Ray can concur with me when you're a pastor's son, the Lord's always there. And he was there in my life. So, I don't have this awesome testimony, but there's some people out there that have really cool testimonies about how they had the unconscious incompetence, and then a friend or whatever tried to get him to come back to church or come to church, and then once they did, they start having these confidence realizations, and they're just like, wow. One of them was an assistant pastor at Lake Point Church. I don't know if any of you, about 5 years ago, his best friend all through college was a real strong Christian. He was always trying to get him to go to church, and he's like, no, that's for those religious people. And his friend always saw something in him that, he had a good heart, but he just, he was getting pulled away. And he actually owned 2 strip clubs. And what else was there? A liquor store, Rita? Forget what it was. So, and he was preaching one time, we'd already heard him several times, and we're like, holy smokes, this guy owned 2 strip clubs. But what happened was, his friend finally, he's like, finally, John keeps asking me to go to church over, and I'm just going to do it because I'm getting tired of him asking me. So he goes to church, and he sat there, and he just totally transformed. He was just like, wow. And he actually broke down and cried. And we all know it was, the Holy Spirit moving him, and he accepted the Lord that day. And he had a living girlfriend. That's what he has, a living girlfriend. And so he goes back that day, and he's told his girlfriend, he says that, explain, the gospel and what he had learned at church that day, and he's giving his life over to the Lord, and he's going to let the Lord rule his life and his decisions. And he said, the first thing I'm doing is, and he gave, not sold, he gave the strip clubs to his partner. He just said, you can have them. I don't want any money off of them. I don't want to make any more money off of them. You can have them. The second thing he did is he told his girlfriend, he says, I love you, sweetie. I want to marry you, but I'm not going to live with you anymore. And she left him. She's like, well, I'm not ready to get married, so packed up her stuff and left. So, his whole life just immediately changed, but he came to that realization, okay? So then he started living his life for the Lord, and eventually became an assistant pastor, and then he went to California, and became a head pastor of a church. But he started living his life for the Lord, and it became unconscious competence for him, and then look what happened to him. So everybody goes through that walk in their life. So with those competences in mind, what I'm going to do is Harold, we can go ahead and show the video. Okay, so this was his first saddling. Okay, now she's already taught him how to drive and move around. And then you'll see him get scared. We'll go right back to what nature tells him to do. Get this thing off my back. It's going to kill me. Now she's reinforcing there because she's already taught him how to come in and look at her. So she's saying, Magnus, come back to me, come back to me, come back to me. She's not making him run forward. She's saying, come back to me. So there's a difference. See how he lined out? She took the pressure off. Boom, looks, takes the pressure off. Pressure on when he's doing something undesirable. Take the pressure off when he's not. Here this is his second ride, I think, or maybe his first ride, but she's teaching him how to give to the pressure. There's a beautiful smile. And then she's going to teach him to go through this obstacle course. That was me videoing, sorry.
You did pretty good being on horseback.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's you between the mirrors, right?
Reva's, when we first got married, she would never let me have the camera because I was always cutting everybody's head off. So you can see she's, obviously done this forward. The backing up was the first time she did it, and so now she's going to go over here to this other obstacle and put him in position. He's like, okay, I'm in position, and those little things are blowing, and he's a little uncomfortable right there, and he's like, I can't do it, Mom. I can't do this. I can't do it. He's trying to take matters into his own hands and say, I got to go look at it, or I got to do something else, and she's like, Magnus, trust me. Trust me. But see how he's got a little gap in his mouth there, his head's up. But he finally gives to her and does it, and he stayed alive, didn't die, and she released him. Okay, so every time you go through something like this with a horse, they get more trusting and, okay, yeah. Same with us, you guys. If something happens to you in life, then you turn back to the Lord and go, okay, yeah, you kept me alive in this. as we go through life with these principles in mind of making or keeping the Lord masters of our lives, we live a happier life while we're here. Does it mean bad things don't happen to us? No, because bad things happen to good people. Okay, it's a fallen world. But the Lord will use anything that we perceive as negative to something positive if you keep Him in the forefront of your mind. So, the scripture that I like the most on this one is Romans 2, and the illustration the Lord's given us is, I feel like, a good one. Let's see, I'll show you. Romans 2, 6 through 10. Who will render to every man according to his works, to them that by patience in well-doing seek for glory and honor and incorruption, eternal life. But unto them that are factious and obey not the truth, but obey unrighteousness, shall be wrath and indignation, tribulation and anguish upon every soul of man that worketh evil, of the Jew first, and also of the Greek. But glory and honor and peace to every man that worketh good, to the Jew first, and also the Greek. So basically, what the Lord is saying there is what we just said. You don't follow Him, there's going to be consequences. Okay? When we follow Him, you're going to live a happier life while you're on this earth. So, the horse, same thing. You will get, you as the master, okay, have an obligation to teach that horse. You do. Just like your children, you have an obligation to teach your children, don't you? If you just let them do whatever they want, for one, they're not going to be happy. Has anybody ever seen a child in a store that is crying and screaming and trying to pull the toys off the shelf or whatever, and the mom is like, "Stop that! Stop it! Quit that! Stop it!" And the kid's not changing at all. It's like still pulling toys off, throwing a tantrum, whatever. So it's the parent's fault, not the child's fault. The parent never probably said, "Now, John, you need to not do that, or there's going to be a consequence." Okay, teaching stage. "John, please don't do that." Okay, nobody likes to be screamed at all of a sudden, and then a constant scream, but then never a boundary. So there was never any follow through with the John, exactly. And no spanking's a bad thing these days. It's kind of like, oh my gosh, you spanked your child? You actually laid a hand on that child? And I'm the adult, you're the child. Okay? That's not an adult. Okay? That's the difference right there. And believe me, kids are smart enough to know the difference. So, the horse is the same way. And then guess what? Holly was like, "I love you. My parents set boundaries for me." Same with the horse. Magnus, when he was bucking and carrying on and trying to get that saddle off his back, he was scared. Very scared, okay? He's thinking something's eating him or attacking him and going to eat him. He's in the right side of his brain. He's doing exactly what the Lord programmed him to do if he was scared. But what I love about that is Reva the whole time was giving him a consequence that once scared him. Motion, noise, three things that set a horse off. Motion, noise, and sound. Or touch. Motion, touch, and sound.
Yep.
And she didn't touch him because he came back, but she was making a lot of motion and noise, and he's just like, "Oh yeah, I love you. There you are. Where were you?" He was scared, came back. Same with us. Do something wrong, I'm not immune to it, nobody's immune to it. You leave the Lord, do something wrong, it's nerve-wracking, it's scary, you get anxious, you're like, "Oh my goodness, what am I going to do?" Okay, give it to the Lord.